Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Black Labor Bulletin in Lukman Nation on Black Power Media. Black Power Media is the most dangerous platform on social media, and you're watching Lukman Nation in Black Power Media. Lukman Nation is the most dangerous show on social media. Thanks so much for joining me. It is I, Jackie Lukman, the People's Prophetess. Very happy to be with you another Friday, this second Friday. Second Fridays are Labor Fridays here in Lukman Nation, and we try to talk about all things Black labor on Second Friday. So thank you so much for joining me, everybody, on this mild, finally, Second Friday. It's interesting that regular summer temperatures they feel mild now after those few weeks of unbelievable, almost unbearable heat that we've had. It's amazing that just, summer temperatures now just feel mild and comfortable. But glad you all are here joining me this evening. I see you all in the chat. David Silberg, Jay, peace from London, UK. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining all the way over from London, Sugar Sham, Ascribe God Blessed, Manny Nile. Yeah, there absolutely were a few weeks of hell, and expect more of it as climate change intensifies. Really glad you guys are here. Don't have a guest tonight, so I just wanted to talk about a few general kind of labor topics that have been floating around in the news and that I've been kind of thinking about. First, I want to share with you all this story out of New York that I'm sure you didn't know anything about. Did you know that the administration of Eric Adams has been trying to kick New York's public sector retirees off of their state Medicare plans and force them into privatized Medicare? Yes, that has been going on. And it didn't start with Eric Adams. It actually started under Mayor de Blasio. So much for progressive mayors. So this is reported in The Gothamist. A judge has had to permanently block Medicare Advantage switch for 250,000 New York City retirees, and the city is planning to appeal under Eric Adams. A New York State Supreme Court judge permanently blocked Mayor Eric Adams' administration from shifting hundreds of thousands of municipal retirees off their Medicare insurance onto a privatized version of the plan, but the city, Mayor Adams, immediately vowed to appeal the ruling. Judge Lyle Frank wrote in a decision and order dated Friday that the city is permanently enjoined, I mean, they can't do it, from requiring any city retirees and their dependents from being removed from their current health insurance plans. The city is also barred from forcing retirees or their dependents to enroll in an Aetna Medicare Advantage plan. You all know that these Medicare Advantage plans that you see the advertisements for, they're privatized Medicare. They're not a part of the Medicare system administered by the government. The proposed cost-cutting replacement or requiring those parties to find their own health plan per the ruling. The proposal, which originated during the de Blasio administration and has the support of municipal labor unions, could save the city $600 million a year. Now, I bet if they took some money from the NYPD, that would save the city a whole lot more than $600 billion a year. That would save the city a whole lot of money. But instead of doing that, taking money from the police department, they are kicking city retirees, or trying to kick city retirees off of the city's Medicare plan and forcing them into these privatized Medicare Advantage plans. And the state Supreme Court said, nah, y'all can't do that. Retirees had protested the plan transition as a potential obstacle to accessing certain medical providers and treatments that left the door open for increased out-of-pocket costs. Jake Gardner, who represented plaintiffs in the case, praised the outcome in a statement on Friday. He said, because of Justice Frank's well-reasoned decision, hundreds of thousands of senior citizens and disabled first responders will be able to continue receiving the medical care they desperately need and to which they are entitled because they work for it and they're entitled to it. And these are not rich people. These are retired city workers who worked for their pension and their medical benefits, and the city is trying to force them into some privatized plan. That the care that a lot of these senior citizens and disabled people would not be able to afford under a privatized plan. Eric Adams knows this. Bill de Blasio knew this, but they pushed this plan anyway. The municipal unions in the city that support this, they know this, but they support this plan anyway. They want to save New York City money off of the backs of retired workers. And that is not right. Take that money from the cops who are not workers. All right, let's go a little bit further. New York City retirees earned their right to federal Medicare, and we relied on the promise we would have this benefit through our lifetime. Pizzatola, who is Marianne Pizzatola, president of the New York City Organization of Public Service Retirees, who is one of the plaintiffs in the case, said that courts have repeatedly, this is not the first time, courts have repeatedly had to step in and stop the city from violating retirees' health care rights. So this is not the first time the city of New York has tried to steal from retired New York City workers in order to address their budget problems. And Pizzatola says, we hope this decision will help retirees nationwide stop their former unions and employer from privatizing the federal public health benefit of Medicare so we can live the rest of our lives in peace. So in this case, and I'm going to drop this article in the chat for you to read for yourself, and let me move my stuff over here onto the other screen. So this case in New York shows that in this country, even retired workers are not safe from neoliberal austerity policies and measures. And I hope that you are getting my audio, because it looks like my video is frozen here. So I'm just going to keep on going and believe that we're just going to catch up. So even as, and you all in the chat are bringing up accurately KRS-One, caping for Eric Adams. David Silberg said, let's get KRS done on the case. Yeah, that's, he's rapping for Eric Adams in one of Eric Adams' recent press conferences. What a farce that was. And let's see there it is. T. Brown said, I can't get the image of KRS tap dancing for Adams. Yeah, I can't get that. I will never get that image out of my mind. It's ridiculous. But even in this country, even workers who are retired workers who have worked and earned their benefits in a time in this country where workers did have pensions and benefits to work toward, they're not even safe from neoliberal austerity policies. And that's why we really have to focus on organizing among the working class of our people. And what does that mean, though? Because I see in a lot of the comments that we on shows that we do, it's mostly on the Remix Morning Show, with some people who have now just kind of finally openly admitted that they don't want to organize because they feel like if they join organizations, then they're going to be targeted by the state. You're going to be targeted by the state anyway. I mean, I don't even understand that argument, but that's what I saw. And I was just like, someone would literally posted, commented, "This is why I don't want to join an organization, because you're going to get targeted by the state." Like, okay. But then the state is going to target you because of who you are anyway. So if you join an organization, if you are organized, at least you are fighting the state collectively. At least you are not out there alone. So that led me to thinking about labor organizing um among the Black working class, and that actually lead me to kind of think about the fact that when most people in this country say working class, they do not think of Black people. And I think that is very true. And I think it's something that we don't consider, that when a lot of people who are not Black talk about working class organizing or working class in any context, they're generally not talking about Black people. And that's for a lot of historical reasons, that's for a lot of bias reasons. And those reasons do factor into the way we are left out of some working class that's supposed to be working class organizing in this country, that's supposed to be left. But it also kind of informs the way we see ourselves in organizing. And I think that's very interesting. And not only did I think it was interesting, but somebody else thought it was so interesting, this idea that in this country, working class for a lot of people means white, that they wrote a book about it. So this new book is, let me increase that for you. This new book is written by a lady named Blair L.M. Kelly, who explores an overlooked history, and that is what it means to be a Black worker in the time since slavery. And I know The Atlantic is a liberalish publication, and I know Ibram X. Kendi has his issues, but this book is very interesting, and I'm going to get it. And I didn't know that this book was even published. And this article was just published in The Atlantic on August 7th. So this is a new book. And the name of the book is Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class. And this author, Blair L.M. Kelly, who was telling the story about her family's working class history, expanded it to make the point that Black people are more likely to be working class than white people are. And that is just the material fact of the condition of Black people in this country. So we really have to begin this effort of deconstructing this myth of what the working class in this country is. And I think this book might be a good start. So in this interview, that's what this article is, an interview that Ibram X. Kendi does with the author of this book, Blair Kelly. It said that she opens up our minds to Black workers, narrating their complex lives over 200 years of American history. Kelly looks at the history of her own working class ancestors, as well as the laundresses, Pullman porters, domestic maids, and postal workers who make up the world of Black labor. I said I was going to move this over here, didn't I? So it stopped looking so weird. Their joys, their skills, their challenges. She also offers historical context. And this is the important part of this book, I think, for the racist ideas about Black workers that endure in our time, while highlighting the ways that Black labor organizing has always helped to fight back against bigotry. And this is a very good section of this article that speaks to how we misunderstand what working class is, and the nexus between class and race in this country. So the article says that myths about race and class continue to dominate our political discourse. For a start, it is a myth that Americans without college degrees are by definition working class. Accumulated or inherited wealth is a more accurate indicator of class status than education or salary, particularly amid an enormous racial wealth gap in the United States. With levels of Black households whose members have a college degree are similar to those of white households whose members don't have a high school diploma. And those white high school dropouts have higher home ownership rates than Black college graduates. Even if we're measuring working class status by college degree attainment, the article says, white Americans at 50.2% are far and away more likely than Black Americans at 34.2%, and Latino Americans at 27.8%, and Native Americans at 25.4% to have a college degree. Therefore, not be working class by this inadequate measure of just not having a college degree. It is also a myth that the white working class is synonymous with supporters of Donald Trump, as Kelly points out in her book Black Folk. In fact, and this is something that we had argued throughout the entire January 6th phenomenon, Trump's base remains more affluent than is popularly portrayed. It's not necessarily a question of Trump voters needing to be educated. Kelly told me this is what Kendi is saying when we spoke recently. It's a set of choices that people are making about their place in the world and what makes them feel verified and validated. Very, very interesting stuff. And I think I highlighted something else in the, yes. This is what Kelly says about this question Kendi wrote, asked of her. He said, "You write that when Black workers are mentioned at all in this country now, the very idea of work is dropped entirely. And instead, they are described as the poor and often implied to be unworthy and unproductive. This is an echo of the characterization of enslaved Black people as lazy and unmotivated. And you wrote this in the opening pages of the book to really set the stage for a larger argument. What was that larger argument?" And Kelly's response is, "I think there is an incredible mislogic around the Black working class, one born in slavery. I put a quote from Thomas Jefferson about him observing Black people and writing in his notes on the state of Virginia that they, the enslaved, slept a lot." And I'm like, sir, as you sit in your chair and somebody fans you and brings you your food, who are you calling lazy? And so that stereotype and its afterlife in our contemporary thinking is a confounding one to me, she says. It's one I really wanted to confront and unpack and pull the thread of throughout the text, because Black workers' contribution to this country are enormous. So calling Black folks lazy or just the poor misunderstands what we've done and how we think of ourselves. I think that is so incredibly important in the conversation about Black workers and Black labor, because I think about a conversation I had with, and let me drop this link in the chat for you to this article. And oh, my computer is slow today. I'm very sorry about that. But we'll get through it. I think a lot. I've been thinking about a lot about this conversation I had with the surgical technicians at the access center I went to get my last surgery to take the CVC access out of my chest when the fistula had matured and I started using the fistula for dialysis. And that means using the needles to do dialysis. So I'm my my vascular surgeon is a really nice guy, and he knows what I do for a living. He knows I'm a radio host on Radio Sputnik, and he's very funny because he will tell everyone this is what I do. He tells everyone, "Do you know she's famous?" And I'm just like, "I'm not famous." That's funny. But he does this. He'll tell everyone, "Do you know she's famous? She's on radio. She has a radio show. Tell everybody what you do." So I do. And the people in the center, the technicians, the nurses, they're mostly Black. And they were really, really interested in the fact that I co-host a radio show. They wanted to know what we talk about. And when I explained what we talk about, that we are working class folks and we talk about working class organizing in the US and around the world, particularly focused on Black and other marginalized people, one of the technicians said, completely unprompted, she said, "I'm all for organizing workers and that's really good, but I don't believe that some people like burger flippers should be making," and I guess my face, I can't control my face, y'all. Like, I cannot control this. So it just does what it feels like doing. And I try, but I just can't control it. So apparently I was giving her the side eye when I heard what she was saying. And then she stopped herself and she's like, "Okay, well, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to keep my opinion to myself. I'm not going to say anything because it doesn't look like you like what I have to say." And I was like, "No. Go ahead. Please go ahead. Say what you have to say." And she finished her thought. "I don't believe burger flippers should be earning more than $15 an hour because why? What skill does it take to flip some burgers, and why should they get more money? Why should they make as much money as I make?" And one of the other technicians was a brother, and he was like, "Yeah, that's cool, that's dope, yes, I like that." And a couple of the nurses come around and they're listening, and I do this all the time, y'all. By the way, I do this all the time. If anybody is ever going to accuse me of evangelizing anything, it is evangelizing organizing the working class. That's what I evangelize. So I do this all the time wherever I go. So, they were all just like waiting for me to respond. And they really were just like leaned in, like, "What you gonna say now? What's the answer?" And my response was simple. Everyone who works a job deserves dignity, and they deserve the dignity of a decent wage, a wage that is enough for them to be able to afford rent, housing, and food off of one job. Everyone who works a job deserves that level of respect and dignity for their work, regardless of what that job is. Everyone should be able to live off of one job. No one should be forced to have to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to survive in a society that is a rapacious capitalist society that is the richest country this world has probably ever seen. I just think that's right. And all the other nurses, all the other technicians were like, "Exactly, that's what's up." Yeah. But I could see that this one technician was not really sold. Because see, we have this idea of certain workers it is indoctrinated from the white supremacist capitalists in this system, that certain workers don't deserve dignity. Certain work is not worthy of our respect. And some of us have this thinking about us. So this is why when you go into a department store or a Target or whatever, and you see like people like throwing clothes on the floor, taking stuff off the rack and just, throwing it all over the place. It's not because people are generally trifling. It's because people don't have respect for retail workers. Because why would you create conditions for another worker that makes it harder for them to do their job? That kind of attitude, when people are rude to waiters and waitresses, when people are nasty to fast food workers, when people don't leave tips to the housekeeping staff in the hotels, it's not because people are generally trifling or evil. It's because people don't respect people who work certain jobs, because we are indoctrinated to believe that certain of us who do low wage work are not worthy of respect, because those jobs are not worthy of respect. And those people who work those jobs because they're lazy. But you and I know that those jobs are staffed by some of the hardest working people that work. So I think this book that is this new book, Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class, I think is very important in helping us dismantle some of the miseducation we have about what it means to be working class in this country, and why all work that all Black people do, and by extension, all work that all working people do, all working class people do, deserves dignity and deserves a dignified view and support from us, those of us who may not be working class, for however we measure that. Let's see, I pulled up another article here about her book. So yes, definitely do go grab it. I'm going to get it. I think I'm going to get it tomorrow, if I can get my thingy to share here. Ooh, this is slow. All right, come on now. Oh, I see why. Okay, let me close that. Hopefully that will, those ads, those pop-up ads, slow things down quite a bit. All right, here we go. Now we can get to sharing the screen. This is another article on this book, published in a publication called Capital in Maine, which I had not heard of before. This was published in July of this year. And the article is How the Solidarity of Black Workers Advanced Labor Rights for All. When you understand the history of Black labor struggles in this country, you understand that when Black people agitated for Black workers' rights, we were really agitating for everybody's rights, but using the plight of Black workers who were usually at the bottom of the worker society, using the plight of Black workers to highlight the exploitation of all workers. Because if you address the issues of Black workers, if you address the issues of the most exploited, then everyone who is exploited on top of the most exploited, their issues get addressed too. It's a bottom up, not a trickle down understanding of organizing and struggle, and bottom up struggles have always been fruitful. So in this article, and this is a cover of the book, Black Folk, The Roots of the Black Working Class, I highlighted this part right here, where Kelly is asked, you chronicle how the Black church has been a launching pad for working class organization. And she's asked to describe that dynamic. And she says, the author of the book, Kelly, says the church is really the first Black institution that gets formed in this country as an independent space after slavery is abolished, because it wasn't independent before slavery was abolished. It often begins in enslavement and then moves with people as they enter freedom. They are finding the space to talk, to think, to theorize, and organize in church spaces because they're away from the gaze of whites. And this is important when you're talking about the history of the Black church after slavery, because during enslavement, Black church could only exist. It could literally only operate if there were white overseers there to ensure that the liberatory scriptures were not taught to the enslaved. The whole book of Exodus. The slave masters wanted to make sure that the slaves did not learn about that entire book of Exodus and the whole freeing of the slaves and the whole God commanding reparations of the Egyptians for the, you see what I mean? So after enslavement, that whole structure of the overseers overseeing religious practices of the enslaved people, that was gone. So now the newly emancipated or the new freedmen continued church services, whatever that was, continued worship, whatever that was. Now they continued it outside of the oversight of the overseers. And something different started to happen. Organizing started to happen in these church spaces. These people began to talk amongst themselves about the ways that now they weren't enslaved, now their labor was being exploited in many, many ways. And what were they going to do about that? And that is where a lot of the labor organizing, and not just any labor organizing, but radical labor organizing, came out of during this period of time after slavery. So I really appreciate that she raised this historical fact. That the church cushions them because it's framed around worship. So as far as the white people knew, the Negroes were just praising the Lord. And maybe they were, but after worship service, there was the meeting after worship. And the meeting after worship was usually an organizing meeting. So these meetings, these worship services that were organizing meetings, became a means by which you share information in a place where communication is safe and to a certain extent secret, because white people didn't want to be messing with Black folks and their business after enslavement, after having had to fight a war, over that kind of thing. So I thought that was very interesting. And there was a time when the church in this country was deeply, deeply involved and entrenched in radical labor organizing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then she goes on to say, to talk about the Great Migration, which started in the early 20th century, in which millions of Americans moved out of the South, often to cities in the North, Midwest, and on the West Coast. What impact did that movement have on the Black working class? And the author of the book says that in the very first generations, the migration shifts labor markets, but it doesn't necessarily put Black people in the places that they thought they might have access to as a result of moving. They moved away from the formal structures of segregation and from the epicenter of lynching and racial violence and disenfranchisement in the South. That's what the Great Migration was about. So for people, who framed the Great Migration as a movement of formerly enslaved Black people and their descendants who fled the South for better employment opportunities, that's not why our people left the South. Our people left the South fleeing racist, violent terrorism. That's why they left the South in the numbers that they did. But they went to other parts of the country hoping that they would escape the violence, yes, but also hoping that they could make a better living than they were making in the South, only to get to other areas in the country and realize that the racism was just as real there too. The exploitation was just as real there too. The exclusion from the job market was just as real there too. So the author says it's a reminder that the problem of race, the problem of de facto segregation, and the problem of discrimination was a national one, which was not completely defeated by leaving the South. She says, my grandmother's generation goes through a period of really having to fight for equal and broader access to good jobs. And she ends the interview by making this very important point. Interracial unionism is born out of Black workers reaching out to white workers and others, and not the other way around. Some of the violence that we see in the labor history has really been about white workers seeing Black workers as a threat. And she says, I'm hoping my book can remind everyone that collectivity is where the power is, and that the broader you can make the movement, the better. I'm going to drop this link in the chat for you as well. So I think this acknowledgement of this history is deeply important in the current labor struggles that we are experiencing in this country today, because people are making these points, right? People are talking about the ways that Black workers in particular are being harmed by these corporate policies, these anti-labor, anti-union policies. And then, of course, the response we get is, well, this is an issue of class, not an issue of race. But, and I thank you for this. Let's see, where did it go? I thank you for this, Jay. Stuart Hall said race is the modality in which class is lived. Race is the primary class contradiction in this country. And I would argue in most capitalist societies. But since we live here, let's keep it here. But thank you so much for that, Jay, all the way from the UK. Appreciate you. So when people come with this pushback against Black labor organizers today who are raising the issue of the way Black workers are harmed the most in these anti-union moves by corporations and by U.S. courts, it's hard not to get frustrated and just want to have words with these people like I do. But sometimes all you have to do is point to the data. Sometimes really you just have to point to the facts and shut people up. Because if race were not a factor in labor struggles, why is it that Black workers comprise 90% of the recent unemployment strike? If race was not a factor that we need to focus on, that is primary to the assaults and the attacks on the working class in general, and if race does not exacerbate those attacks for the Black working class, explain to me, how is it that the majority of the people unemployed in the past spike in unemployment claims were Black people? This is just from July of this year, published in The Hill. A labor Bureau of Labor Statistics report last month found that Black Americans made up 90%, 90, of those who are unemployed in the U.S. since April. Black workers made up about 276,000 of the 300,000 new unemployment cases this spring, the report said. But race is not an issue. All of those Black people were laid off, lost their jobs because of their working class status. They just happened to all 90% of them be Black. Stop it. The current unemployment rate of the demographic sits at 6%. And people always talk about the historically low unemployment rate among Black people, 6%, but it's still twice the unemployment rate of white people, which is the 3%. That's a coincidence too. Come on now. Come on, Scrolly, do the thing. Oh, these pop-up ads are killing me tonight. So there is a quote here in this article in which they say April marked record lows in unemployment among Black Americans, and the month also had the smallest gap between Black and white unemployment. And when they say smallest gap, it's not like the gap is like this. What they mean is the gap was like this, and now the gap is like this. It's not like the gap is suddenly surmountable. It is still an insurmountable gap between Black and white unemployment. But the director of the St. Louis Fed's Institute of Economic Equity said that if conditions continue to weaken, and they will, or accelerate, and they will, the gains won by Black workers and other vulnerable groups could diminish quickly. And I highlighted this because I want to talk about the gains won that he's talking about here, because we have to take his idea of the gains won with a pinch of salt, with a large, not a pinch, with a pound of salt, because we're not talking about gains that have improved the material conditions of Black workers by any sustainable and real measure. So I'm going to drop this in the chat for you if you want it. I'm sure you do. But let's talk about those gains for a minute for Black workers that are supposed to be, that has narrowed the unemployment gap between Black and white workers. Not a whole lot. And before I do that, let me go up while my computer is catching up to me. Let me go up and see what you all are saying. Oh, man, this sucker is slow tonight. Jay says again that unemployed people are capitalism's bank reserve of workers, the surplus workers. That's absolutely right. Whoops. T. Brown, I'm a surplus worker. We have all been a surplus worker at some point. Let's see. Let me see. Well, thank you, T. Brown. Look at the Alabama workers struggling for a union, the Alabama prison strikes. The South is a key labor struggle in the U.S., and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I'm so glad you brought that up. So let's talk about these gains that Black workers supposedly made. All right. Because we need to take that with a little bit of, a lot of salt. So this is an article in the New York Times, and actually it's like a little newsletter, a little blog that was published in June of this year. So it's published for Juneteenth, that says the racial wealth gap is shrinking. Though still enormous, and this is the sub headline, though still enormous, the gap has shrunk over the past 5 years. So if the gap is still enormous, why do you think I care? Why should we care that it shrunk a little bit? So we're going to what he means, and this is David Leonhardt, where he says, I'll try to explain why the gap has narrowed and what would have to happen for it to narrow more. And can I just say, I'm tired of hearing this conversation about narrowing the racial wealth gap. It needs to be obliterated, but the only way it can be obliterated is if the capitalist system that created it and exacerbates it and props it up is obliterated, because there is no narrowing the racial wealth gap in a capitalist system that thrives off of racial capitalism. It is not going to happen. So that is the grain of salt that we need to keep in mind when we hear these people talking about narrowing the racial wealth gap, because they're not talking about systems outside of the existing capitalist system that creates the racial wealth gap, that perpetuates the racial wealth gap, that continues to entrench racial capitalism to ensure that the racial wealth gap persists no matter how many gains Black workers make. Because what happens is this capitalist system always moves the goalposts so that white people continue to out-earn Black people in every context. So let's get into why he tries to explain why the gap has narrowed and what would have to happen for it to narrow more. He says, after all, even with the recent progress, the median Black worker makes 21% less than the median white worker. 21% less. So his first argument in the narrowing of the racial wealth gap is a strong economy. And this is a bogus bullshit argument, because it's a strong economy for who? It's not a strong economy for workers whose wages have not kept up with inflation or the cost of living. And that's workers across the board. Whenever people talk about the economy is strong, they mean for the corporations. The economy is strong for the corporations and the stock market, not for the workers. So his very first argument about the economy is strong, which produces a tight, which loosens the labor market, which means there are more jobs. That's bullshit, because people are not making a good living. They're not making a living wage off of these jobs that are being produced. We're not talking about six-figure jobs that this economy that Biden is always bragging about producing. Most of these jobs are low-wage service jobs. A lot of these jobs are gig jobs, like DoorDash and that kind of thing. And I'm not frowning on those jobs. What I'm saying is those jobs are not sustainable for a worker to live off of one salary. They don't tell you all of that in the quarterly labor reports. So yeah, this type labor market foolishness, whatever. He does bring up, and this surprised me, the fight for 15. Now it is interesting that obviously someone who is not advocating for the utter destruction of this capitalist system would give props to the fight for 15. But it's good that he did. But we have to keep in mind that the fight for 15 is more than a decade old. And it was started by a group of fast food workers in New York City who demanded a higher minimum wage. And the fight for 15 has been effective in getting some municipalities, some cities in this country to increase their minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $15 an hour. But in that 10 years, what has happened? The cost of living everywhere in this country has gone up. So $15 an hour, which was the floor for a minimum wage increase back then, that is not a livable wage now. It was barely a livable wage for minimum wage then. It absolutely is not a livable wage for a minimum wage now. So even if cities have legislated a raise in their minimum wage to $15 an hour, and in some places like New York City, we're talking $16 or $17 an hour, the cost of living in those places far outpaces the rise in minimum wage, where to the point where there's nowhere in this country where anybody making $15 an hour can afford a one-bedroom apartment. That's just the material reality of life for working people in this country. And then most of these cities, when they passed these laws, raising their minimum wage, they did it incrementally and raised the and legislated the minimum wage increases over 5 or 10 years, which slowed down the rate wages compared to the rate of inflation even more. So working class and poor stay poor. So even though the Fight for 15 has made gains in pushing some municipalities and cities to raise their minimum wages, the Fight for 15 has not changed the material conditions of working class and poor service workers, because the wage increases have not been implemented to be on pace with the rise in the cost of living. And that is intentional on the part of these city governments that implement the laws the way they do. Oops. Thank you so much, Chitimacha 1025. $15 an hour is $31,200 in an annual salary. That is not a living wage in most cities. So I'm going to drop this in the chat. I'm sorry. No, hold on. I think there was some more in here that I wanted to highlight. There is. Hold on a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. Waiting for the computer to catch up to me. Ooh, she is just, there we go. All right. She is cold today. And this is the other thing. He points out Black Lives Matter. He makes a good point that the economic inequality can substantially shrink, or reduction in economic inequality can substantially shrink the Black-white wage gap. But he does make the valid point, but that gap will never approach zero so long as racial inequalities remain as large as they are in the US. And even that language is messy for me, because it's not as large. It's not racial inequalities as large as they are. It is that racial inequality is a factor of this capitalist system. So that we cannot continue to have this discussion of addressing racial inequality or reducing racial inequality. This is why this entire system must be dismantled, because the racial inequality is baked into it. Racial inequality is how this system, this capitalist system in this country, grew to the economic powerhouse that it became and that it is today. So there's no reducing economic inequality. This system must be destroyed for economic inequality to be dismantled, and a clean slate based on human rights and equality for everyone has to be established. All right. So now I can stop sharing this, and I'm going to drop this in the chat for you so you can read it for yourself. So when we're looking at the material conditions of the Black working class in this country, and the fact that most of our people are working class, they are not employed in white collar jobs. Organizing among the working class should look and feel, and a doggone should sound different. We should be doing this differently than I think that a lot of us approach it, organizing the Black working class, and not just around labor, but because, this is the Black Labor Bulletin, that's what we're talking about tonight. But organizing the Black working class should look different from the organizing among the general working class that the white working class organizes, because it is a different thing. Because our material conditions, while we share some features of oppression, white working class folks getting their ass kicked by the bosses just like Black working class folks are. But we have to understand, and this is something that we have a difficult time getting our white working class brothers and sisters to understand. Some of them, not all, but some of them, we have a hard time getting them to understand that Black workers get our asses kicked a little bit extra in a little extra different way from the way they do. And the same is true, by the way, for white women, for Black women, for Latinx women, for immigrant women, for queer and trans people, for disabled people. Yes, we're all oppressed by this system, generally in the same way under capitalism, but we are all oppressed differently in addition to the general class oppression, according to how we are identified by this system. So queer and trans Black people are discriminated against on the job and in housing in a different way that Black working class people are not, even though Black working class people are discriminated against on the job and in housing. You see what I mean? So what that looks like is homelessness increases among the Black working class and poor. And when I say poor, I do mean Black people who are working. Black people who are working in mostly service and low-wage jobs. And when I say working class, I do mean Black people who are not white-collar, middle management workers, right? So what that looks like is homelessness is increasing among the Black working class and the Black poor, even as it's increasing among all working class and poor, but it's a greater percentage of the Black working class and poor. And when you drill down and look at the percentage of homeless and jobless Black, queer, and trans people, the percentage of those Black people is astronomical. So we have got to organize differently from this top down, it's only class. No, we have got to look at the different ways in which all of our people are oppressed in different ways by this system, and organize across industry, across intersectionality, gather all our people. And this is where organizing in the South comes in, because this is not new, y'all. We're asking these questions about, how do we do this, as if we don't have a history of doing it. And I think the way we look at our history of struggle in this country, we tend to look at our struggles as losses, because the system crushed our movements. But I contend that if we were not being successful, if we were not winning, the system wouldn't have bothered to crush us. So I don't think at all, I don't believe at all that our history of struggle means that we have not been successful in organizing against the system. I contend that the fact that the system did all that it did and continues to do to keep us from organizing means that not only have we been successful, but if we keep doing what we were doing, we will continue to be even more successful. All right, let me address this right now. Some brothers in the shelter I work at say they don't want to work. They want to live off the state, ex-girlfriends and wives, real talk. So what? So I think this state owes us a few decades of paid vacation where we don't have to work if we don't fucking want to. So I am not mad if somebody who has worked all their lives, and I say this from the perspective of someone who was married to a man who lived this and died as a result of the exploitation and the hatred of Black people, particularly Black men in this system. You see Black people working at an early age, entering into the workforce when they are 14, 15 years old, trying to help the family out. They've worked low-wage jobs all their lives. They could never get a decent salary. They never made enough money to really make a living. They always had to work 2 and 3 jobs, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And what do they get for decades of back-breaking, low-paid work, ending up in a homeless shelter? And you're mad because they're like, fuck working. What's it done for me? I am sitting here in a homeless shelter. I have worked all my life, and all I could get out of this system was a homeless shelter. And I'm supposed to be mad that they're like, I am going to find a way to do nothing and live off this system. My answer to them, good on you. Let me know when you figure that out. Let me know if I can help you figure that out. And this whole thing about, living off of their ex-wives and girlfriends, stop pitting black women and Black men against each other like that. That's not gonna fly here. I don't do that here. And if you have ever known me and my husband, you would understand that's a line we don't cross here. I am not mad at Black workers, Black people who have given this system their whole life, and they couldn't even get enough out of this system to keep a roof over their heads. I'm not going to be mad at them because they are going to try to get something out of this system that they could never get when they were working. So I actually do. You aren't the only one who has experiences because you work in a shelter, which I doubt that you do. I pray to God you are not taking that funky, nasty, anti-Black, Black folk, poor folk hating attitude to struggling people in the shelter. I really, really hope that you are flat out lying, because dear God help those people who have to deal with you as a caseworker. Jesus. You know what? Let me, where's the thing? Because as soon as this thing comes up, we're having a good conversation here about a serious topic, and here comes this Negro liberal, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I'm not doing it. So, and let me explain something to you. When white people don't want to work, don't nobody say shit. Don't nobody say nothing about white people being the people who collect welfare the most. Nobody says anything about an entire Orthodox Jewish community and religious cults, the Latter-day Saints, the polygamists out in Utah. You know those people subsidize their living by collecting welfare, don't you? So we sitting around here talking about Black folks who don't want to work, which is exactly the argument the author of the book that we started this conversation with was talking about. These ideas that we have about Black people being lazy, that comes from the slave masters calling us lazy after they have worked us damn near to death, and we pass out sleep on the one day off that we have. And Thomas Jefferson go sit there and write, oh my God, the Negroes, they sleep a lot. And we're carrying that mentality about poor Black people into our interactions with poor Black people today. No, sir, not here. Take your Negro, liberal, anti-Black, anti-poor bullshit somewhere else. So let's talk about labor organizing in the South. Got me hot. I got to turn on this fan. Hold on. Hold, just stay right there. Got to turn the ceiling fan on. Jesus. All right. So let's talk about labor organizing in the South. So this article, a fantastic article that was published in Teen Vogue of all places. Remember when Teen Vogue was about like fashion and boy bands? And man, Teen Vogue is turned communist and it's great. So let me share this article. Come on now. There you go. So this article was published a little while ago in March of 23. But this article is about the Union of Southern Service Workers, a union that has been organizing service workers, low-wage workers in the South. This is absolutely, look at that t-shirt. I got to get one of those t-shirts. And I did reach out to the Union of Southern Service Workers to be a guest on this show. So hopefully next month, I will be able to get a representative of the Union of Southern Service Workers on so we can go do a deep dive into their work. This article is fantastic. I highlight here some very important labor history about labor legislation in this country. Because there's also a misunderstanding about what laws that were passed that were supposed to be for workers, to protect workers in this country, what they really did, who they really protected, and who they excluded, and why. So it's very important that this history is in this article. They point out that in 1935, when the National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA, which is a landmark labor law that gave most workers the legal right to organize, bargain, and strike, when that law was passed, it included several glaring omissions. It included domestic workers and agricultural workers, many of whom were Black, particularly in the South. The NLRA made it clear that for all its New Deal era progressivism, the politicians who passed it decided that some workers simply weren't fighting for it. And this is an argument that I've had with people about the New Deal and how, and I believe this is an argument that scholar Dr. Adolph Reed makes. And I disagree with him on this idea that the New Deal was a boon for Black workers. How could it have been when it was crafted and passed by a bunch of racists who, despite all the good language about the workers this and workers have a right that and workers have a right this, that, and the third, they excluded the group of workers that were mostly Black people. So they excluded Black people in a way that they didn't come out and say, we're going to exclude Black people from benefiting from this legislation, right? That's what this was about, these kinds of exclusions in these labor laws. And it wasn't just the labor laws, it was also Social Security and other kinds of programs where certain workers in certain industries were excluded. And coincidentally, you look and see that most of the people in those industries, most of the workers in those industries just happened to be Black. So it was a way for the politicians to exclude most Black people without coming right out and saying they were excluding most Black people. And here is where the history, the very long and deep and important history of labor organizing in the South is raised in connection with communist organizing. And I love that they brought up Robin D.G. Kelley's Hammer and Hoe, his seminal work on communist labor organizing in the Deep South in the 40s. It is an incredible book. It gives you an insight into the kind of organizing that these poor Black tenant farmers and sharecroppers engaged in were blatantly, overtly communist and were trying to organize with white sharecroppers and tenant farmers. They existed, they were exploited too. But the breakdown in that multiracial organizing was always the bosses and the landowners' ability to play on the racist sentiment of some of the white workers. Not always, but sometimes. But Robin D.G. Kelley's Hammer and Hoe, if you really want to understand the history of Black labor struggle in this country, you've got to get that book. It doesn't tell the whole story, but it does tell an amazing story about the legacy, the history and the legacy of labor organizing in the South, and why that history is so important to the resurgence of labor organizing that's going on now through organizations like the Union of Southern Service Workers. So this article, and a lot of these workers are young. Look at this baby. Look at this little child out here agitating. The Union of Southern Service Workers was co-founded by over 150 retail, fast food, restaurant, and care workers who live and work throughout the South. USSW went public in November, but it has been on a decade of it has built on a decade of prior organizing work by Raise Up the South, the Southern branch of the Fight for 15, and a union, Southern 15 and a union campaign, and backed by the Service Employees International Union, or the SEIU. Staff organizers provide support when desired, but the new union is entirely worker-led, did not bother filing for recognition from the National Labor Relations Board before going public. And as far as USSW is concerned, a union is a group of workers organizing collectively, and that is exactly who they are. They go on to say that the USSW is unique among American labor unions for several reasons. First, it is far more focused on direct action and building worker power on the shop floor than in winning elections or dealing with the NLRB. And in this way, this article says USSW has far more in common with, guess what? The Anti-Capitalist Union Industrial Workers of the World, founded in 1905, than it does with most other traditional labor unions in the US. IWW also very communist adjacent, if not outright communist, and an interracial workers union that had Black leadership. Yes, you can get this article in the chat. So once again, we're seeing this new labor union in the South, organized by mostly young, mostly Black service, low-wage workers, building on a history of communist Black labor organizing in the South. Y'all, this is monumental. This is absolutely monumental. So the article goes on to say, and quoting Sarah DeArmond, who is 23, she lives in Cullowhee, North Carolina. I don't even know where that is. It's a small town in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She works in a bakery, in the bakery section of a local Walmart, even though she has a degree in sociology and international studies. Why does she stay at Walmart? Because there are no decent paying jobs where she lives. Now imagine this: you have a degree, you have a degree with a double minor, sociology and international studies, and you want to take that knowledge and you want to use it and apply it to help the people in your community, but you can't. Why? Because there are no jobs in your community where you can put these skills that you have gained through your degree to work. So you have to make a living, so you work at Walmart. Walmart is one of the top 3 employers in this country. So when we're talking about the Black working class in this country, remember what we said at the beginning, we're not just talking about people who don't have a college degree, because a lot of our people do have a college degree. And they are working low-wage jobs because they cannot get any other job opportunities. So DeArmond says, when workers strike, the company loses money. And let me start here. She says, we focus on strikes and actions because how else are you going to get anything done if you don't act? She says, when workers strike, the company loses money. It reminds them that workers are the ones actually running everything and making the profit. Plus, strikes catch the public's attention. Living in this country where everyone expects everything to be on demand all the time, when you go to a drive-through and you can't get your favorite drink because they're on strike, it reminds the public that who runs the world? Workers run the world. That's an amazing quote. And this is the kind of thing that you're not hearing from some of these neoliberal middle management run labor union bosses, because they're very much with maintaining the status quo of top-down power. These people understand that it's the workers who have the power. So they're building a worker base from the ground up across industry. And, excuse me, as they point out a little bit later in this article, across industries that people look down on. So, Alan, who is this? Oh, let's see. Who is this person? I want to make sure I get you, tell you who this is. I can't find it right now, but I'm going to give you the article so you can find it. So another representative says that we're the workers that a lot of people look down on. A lot of people don't treat fast food workers, gas station workers, or other service workers with respect. Everybody struggles on the job, whether it's fast food, retail, care work. Everybody is underpaid. All these things we have in common. We all need change. That's why we're organizing across the service industry. There's high turnover, and workers usually move to different jobs, from retail to being a server in a restaurant to home care. And a lot of our members work 2 jobs at the same time. So when you switch jobs, you can still be a part of our union and have the union protecting you at all these jobs. And most importantly, the USSW is a loud, proud, explicitly anti-racist union. Many other unions claim to be the same, but this one places the issue front and center, drawing clear connections between how the legacy of slavery, the region's Jim Crow past, and its fundamentally unequal present impact Black and brown workers. USSW is a multiracial and anti-racist organization. There's a long history of workers organizing here in the South. There is history of Black workers organizing. And there's also been a history of Black and white and brown workers coming together and organizing here in the South. A lot of people never learn this history. Our union is going to be like those workers before us who weren't afraid to fight. We are going to come together and fight for our demands. Beyond that, USSW ensures that its members who have intersecting marginalized identities have the space and support to bring additional issues to the fore. Why is this important? Because we don't all know everything and we don't all have the same experiences. I wasn't considered disabled until November of 2022, when I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, end-stage renal disease, and I had to go on dialysis. Needing to be on dialysis categorized me as disabled. So I didn't really always think about how disabled people are engaged in worker struggles and how differently they are discriminated against in the workplace. This is why we have to focus on these intersecting issues of marginalized people, because we all don't have the same experiences. So we all need to make space for people's different experiences and different oppressions to be addressed, so we know how to fight for people who are fighting different battles from ours. All right. So they go on to talk about talk to Ashley Ruth Eccles. Yeah, she's from the South. Ashley Ruth Eccles, who's 31. She currently works at Macy's in the Mall of Georgia in Atlanta. And she is a neurodivergent worker and a stroke survivor. And she said she is particularly interested in ensuring that workers in her position, disabled people, neurodivergent people, know that they feel empowered to organize. She said, I want them to know their rights if they're being treated unfairly at their jobs, and help others know the tools they can use to organize and demand fair treatment. I want to tell neurodivergent people that there are resources, there is help, there is a place for them, regardless of what anybody tells them. And this is Ashley Ruth right there, working at the Macy's. So this is a fantastic article, and I'm absolutely going to drop it for you in the chat because you should have it and read it and peruse it and go through all of the links. That's the other thing I love about sharing articles with y'all. The links that when people write a good article, if they're really good, if they really did their research, they provide a lot of links, and I love that. That's because I just like to have more and more stuff to read. I'm also going to give you, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this National Labor Relations Act Board and the Fair Labor Standards Act. And this is from an article about Amazon's labor union. I know there's some questions that are rising about Chris Small's leadership in the Amazon labor union. I'm going to let those people work that out. I have no opinion on it right now. I'm just saying I recognize there are questions, there are issues, there are conversations going on about Chris Smalls right now. And I'm not going to weigh in on them, just acknowledging that they're happening. And this article is from last year, but they do point out, and this is, I know Jacobin, and I know, but they do point out that Amazon's union is a part of the legacy of Black labor organizing that we've been talking about. And they bring up some more of this great history that I love to share. They say that the gains that millions of Black people who relocated from the South to the Northeast and the Midwest, and they make this ridiculous claim in pursuit of employment. It wasn't in pursuit of employment. It was to escape racist terrorist violence. That's never forget, cast out of your mind that the Great Migration was the pursuit of was Black people's pursuit of better employment from the South to the North. It was our people running for their lives from the Klan and the Concerned Citizens Council and all their friends. That's what the Great Migration was about. But they say the gains that occurred alongside the government's refusal to extend rights to many workers of color. In 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act. You hear that a lot in, labor discussions today, the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was another landmark piece of legislation enshrining protections for workers. Yet, it also excluded domestic, agricultural, and tipped workers, purposefully denying many Black and Brown people the same rights and protections given to white workers. Additionally, according to the National Employment Law Project, they say that nearly half of all Black men, Mexican American men, and Native American men and women were excluded from, like I said, Social Security, unemployment insurance, and the right to organize in the National Labor Relations Act of 1935 that we just talked about in the other piece. So all of this stuff is connected. It is not only all connected, but it is all the inequality that we are experiencing today, the racial wealth gap, the inequality in employment, the higher rates of unemployment among Black people compared to white people. It's not only all connected, but it is entrenched in law. It was created by these laws. So don't tell me that we are going to address income inequality and the racial wealth gap with some piecemeal measures. We have to dismantle the very systems that literally created the inequality. That's what this history is telling us. Let's see, what else did they say here? That was it. That was the big deal in this article. But I'm going to give you this one too, although, Jacobin, whatever, man. So when we are looking at the labor organizing that's going on today, and we're trying to have the conversation with our white working class brothers and sisters who are also organizing, and they don't want to address the issue of race, feel free to share with them every one of those resources. And a couple of extra ones. I haven't finished reading this one because this is a very, I think this is a Jacobin too. But I'm going to give this to you. This is another Jacobin piece on Robin D.G. Kelley's. Actually, this is an article by Robin D.G. Kelley about the Black Belt communists. I'm going to drop that in there for you so you can share and share alike. Oh, I'm sorry. That article was from Teen Vogue on Chris Smalls and the Amazon Labor Union. Sorry about that. My apologies. The Black Belt Communist article is from Jacobin. I know it's a weird source, but Robin D.G. Kelley on the good history of Black communist organizing in the South. It's very deep, it's very dense, but it's very good. And when we encounter these people among the white left who don't want to talk about race in labor organizing in particular, remind them that this is what labor was for us. These were the working conditions for us and our ancestors. After enslavement, I mean, there was 200 plus years of enslavement. And then there was this for 100 years, about 100 years. And then there was Jim Crow, another 100 years. And these people are actually talking about race it's not important. Race doesn't matter. How? When it was discrimination based on race that was covered up in different ways, but it was discrimination of workers based on race that created an unequal work culture and society in this country for our people that we continue to struggle against today. This was published on July 26th of this year on Texas Public Radio. And this is apparently an article about 95 Black forced labor prisoners from the Jim Crow era whose bones were unearthed in Sugar Land after one man's quest to find. Yes, it is about graves. It is about graves, T. Brown. Absolutely. See, you got to understand, Black people's labor struggle, it is in our DNA. Our involvement in labor struggles, in the history of labor struggles, in the history of fighting for workers' rights, in the history of demanding better for exploited workers, it's in our DNA. Because our blood and our bones have fertilized the soil of that struggle, and not just in this country, but around the diaspora. So this article says that they talk about the Texas convict leasing program, which is the context of these forced labor workers existed in. They talk about how this program was in effect from the late 1870s to the early 1910s. And how this convict leasing pogrom, because that's what it really was sustained, was that the white capitalists were mad that the Civil War took their free labor pool from them of enslaved people. So they had to find a way to get that free labor back. And the convict leasing program was pogrom. Let me keep saying that. The convict leasing pogrom was how they did it. How did they just, run around and arrest all of these Black people? They made up laws that didn't exist before, that they applied to the newly emancipated free people, where there were no laws on the books almost anywhere in this country that criminalized vagrancy. All of a sudden, after the Civil War ended and our ancestors were trying to find a place to go and a place to be, then all of these vagrancy laws were put on the book. Black codes, laws that were written to criminalize every aspect of Black people's existence in order to feed them into the convict leasing system. They had to justify locking free people up who supposed to have rights now in some way, and that's how they did it. These vagrancy laws. And do you know that in some places in this country, some of these laws are actually still on the books and still enforced? This is why. In our hoods, when we are hanging out on the stoop, on the corner, having our ciphers, drinking our 40s, socializing, because, we don't have clubhouses and country clubs. This is why the police will roll up on us while we're hanging out and socializing and tell us break it up. It is all connected. It is all one stream of history. So they say in this program that Black people were often arrested for minor offenses such as vagrancy or petty theft, and then sentenced to long terms of hard labor. The conditions under which they worked were often brutal, and many convicts died from overwork, disease, or violence. Sugar Land, Texas was a major center of the convict leasing program. The city was home to Imperial Sugar Company. Imperial Sugar still exists, which leased large numbers of convicts from the state. The state carried these pogroms out, to work in the sugarcane fields. So the states that participated in these convict leasing pogroms made money off of leasing people that the state criminalized and locked up to companies who then profited off of their cheap or free and forced labor. You can take that conversation wherever you would like, but that's what, yeah. In recent years, there had been renewed interest in the history of the Texas convict leasing pogrom. In 2018, the remains of 95 African Americans who were believed to have been convict laborers were found in Sugar Land. The discovery of these remains has helped to shine a light on the dark history of the program and its connection to the city of Sugar Land. And there's a whole interview here. This is a podcast. That I'm going to share with you also. But there is no way that we can talk about the history of labor struggle in this country, the history of the struggle for fair working conditions, decent and safe working conditions, fair pay, the fight to dismantle discrimination in all forms in the workplace. There's no way that those struggles can be entered into without focusing on the centrality and the role that Black labor has played in the very long history of labor struggle in this country. So there is no conversation about labor struggles in the US today where the context of how this is going to impact the Black worker is not proper, because history proves that how Black workers are impacted is the foundation of labor. Black workers rising up and saying, fuck this shit. We are not taking this from the bosses. Black workers who knew very well they were no longer slaves and said, you know what? You ain't working us to death for free. No, sir. Nope. We're going to fight for what's fair for us. Even in the face of unconscionable violence, even in the Deep South, when lynch mobs and night riders, that was the Klan who would ride on horseback at night with torches, chasing Black folks, riding up on churches, trying to catch Black folks organizing in a meeting. And I have heard stories where Black people would be having a labor organizing meeting. And I think a couple of these stories are in Hammer and Hoe, where Black folks and white folks, Black sharecroppers and white sharecroppers, were meeting in a church, having a labor meeting, having a communist labor meeting. And there would be a lookout outside to warn them when white people were rolling up on the church so they could take out their Bibles and start singing hymns and clapping and stomping and praising the Lord. So when we're talking about labor organizing today, we do have to focus on how race is the way class is articulated in this country, and how race is the way class is used as a bludgeon against Black workers in the workers' struggles today. So that's all I got for tonight. I hope it was helpful for you. I hope you learned some new things. I always hope that I at least share some new information that people didn't know before. And you know, just to let people know, I consider these shows that I do, I hate to be kind of mystical about it, but I do consider them kind of sacred spaces, because, you know, you all know the story about how Luke Mon Nation got started and how Luke Mon Nation is incredibly special to me. I could have given up. I could have let all this go. I could have, when I was diagnosed with all this, after Abdus died, after his son died, after Brewski died, after my whole little family and my whole little life was snatched away in what seemed like an instant after I lost my health and I had to be on dialysis. I could have said, I'm not doing this anymore. And a lot of people were telling me I should have said that because I need to protect my health and I need to take care of myself. But Lukman Nation helped me discover my voice. And Abdishahid Lukman helped me discover my voice through Lukman Nation. So there was no way I could give this up. There was no way I could just let this fall. No, that's not. No, like I said, if I evangelize anything, I evangelize for the Black masses, to organize the Black masses. So when people come into this space in which I take the information I am sharing, when I am sharing information, very seriously, I laugh, I joke, I try to be lighthearted, but this is life or death for me because I have seen in my own life how this system kills us, and I've seen it more than once. It wasn't just with Abdus. This is a serious endeavor for me. And I understand that not everyone will agree with my opinions and my perspectives and my analysis. And believe it or not, y'all, I am totally cool with that. I am cool with disagreement. As a matter of fact, if you're mature and principled, you understand that you can only learn some things through a principled struggle with your comrades. And that means disagreeing and hashing out ideas and hearing a different perspective and trying to see things from a perspective that maybe you hadn't thought of before. So, yeah, I'm cool with people disagreeing with what I have to say. But what I won't tolerate and what I don't have to tolerate, I don't care what anybody says, what I don't have to tolerate in my space, and this right here is my space, what I don't have to tolerate is disrespect. And I've noticed that there have been a couple of people who have popped up in a few instances who seem to be on a mission to just antagonize and disrespect me just because they have nothing better to do, just because they want to get a rise out of me, because whatever it is. There are some folks who are still mad because I called out those racist ass white people in their rally, even though those racist ass white people have proven that I was right, that they are racist since then with their racist ass tweets. But that some of those people are still mad at me, and they show up and they say shit. I see it in the chat. Most of the time I ignore. Whenever I say something about queer or trans people, the people come out of the woodwork and say shitty things in the chat. And then you get this dude, the Negro liberal, who has all the shit, all the smoke for poor Black people. I don't have to take that disrespect because that's what it is. And while I don't necessarily take it personally, because these people don't know me, they don't have a heaven or a hell to put me in, they don't pay this mortgage over here, they don't put food in my refrigerator. You feel me? At the same time, they don't deserve access to my space, and they don't deserve access to me. So they don't get it. And I don't care what anybody says about how, because people are always like, oh, you shouldn't block people on social media. That's censoring people. If these people acted this way in real life, I would punch them in the face. I wouldn't tolerate this kind of behavior in real life. Why should I tolerate this kind of behavior online? I don't know where people get this idea that just because you have a platform online that you're supposed to allow people access to you to say all kinds of ridiculous things. But please just know and understand, I'm not tolerating that here. If that makes you uncomfortable, I understand, and that's okay. That's cool. But like I said, this is my shit. Lukman Nation is my shit. This is my show. This is my space. This is our space. And I am going to protect it from people who I see are trying to do us harm and sow discord. So anytime that happens, that's what's going to happen. So, all right. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I appreciate you. Hope you had a good time tonight. I sure did. Thank you so much. Next Friday is Third Friday, and you know what that means, Blackonomically Speaking, with our resident economist, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. Get your questions ready. And you know what, y'all? You know what I want you to do? I want you to email me at luqmannation@gmail.com, LUQMANNATION @gmail.com, and drop me some questions to ask Dr. Tauheed because he loves your questions. So if you remember, either before or after the show, drop me questions that you want him to answer, and I will make sure that we either answer them during the show or he answers them later on because he does love them. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you very much for watching tonight. As always, you know what we say. Be good to yourselves and be good to each other. A luta continua. The struggle continues. But I promise, if we keep struggling, if we keep fighting, and if we keep fighting together and for each other, Victoria a certa. Peace.